So today I've decided to talk about white supremacy in school curriculum. I want to start off by saying about how prevalent it still is today. I think a lot of people think that because segregation happened so many years ago, and the Civil War happened so many years ago, slavery happened so many years ago, I think a lot of people think that white supremacy isn't something that happens very much today, and I think the opposite is true. I think it's something that not only happens in our schools, but it can happen every day to a lot of people. I think that, intentional or not, many lessons in school curriculum have major gaps in them, or they have changes to cover up acts that white people have committed to people of color throughout history. And I think this is because white people want to be able to have that reputation that's very clean. They're embarrassed of what they've done, so they want to cover it up. This is considered white supremacy because white people have the privilege to be able to rewrite history, to be able to pay the money to go through the history books, and have the power through the government to go and change history books and the ideas that people have believed for so long. And they do this because it benefits themselves and makes themselves look better than they would if people found out the truth. I think an example of white supremacy in curriculum is Christopher Columbus Day. He's been celebrated in the United States as a hero for hundreds of years. I think I saw 1792 as the first Christopher Columbus Day. Schools really play him up as the man who discovered America, and he's the reason for Thanksgiving and all these things. So I think that people forget, they just hear this and they don't hear the bad things that he's done. He's responsible for pushing slavery of Native people. He's also responsible for the extinction of the Taino people. But textbooks leave this out. There's not very much touched on it. I know personally in elementary school, I never heard anything about anything bad that Christopher Columbus did. And I think also a lot of people don't consider Christopher Columbus Day a real holiday. I think it's something that the banks observe and some government agencies, but I don't think a lot of people really sit there and celebrate Christopher Columbus Day or think about it. So it's something that's kind of been pushed to the back burner in recent years. As far as school curriculum, textbooks leave out all the things that Christopher Columbus did that were terrible to the indigenous people. I think this is because they don't want a bad reflection of the white people coming to America. It's just terrible what he did, and I don't think that's a good reflection on how we started our country. I think it's embarrassing. It's important to teach our students history like it really happened, even though it makes the white people look bad, because the students, this is what they're going to be teaching their kids one day, and their kids, and their kids, and this is how it gets pushed on generation to generation. If you're covering up facts for this long, people are going to start to forget that there's cover-ups and there's gaps in the story, and they're just going to keep believing this is the truth and that Christopher Columbus had this clean slate. It shouldn't be up to teachers to decide whether they should teach about Christopher Columbus Day or not. They should obviously teach about what Christopher Columbus did because he did do some really remarkable things, but he also did a lot of things that were really terrible. So I think it's very important for teachers to be able to provide students with all aspects of the lesson and not just their own choice of what they think represents Columbus Day. Teaching of slavery is also a very good example of white supremacy in curriculum. In my personal experience, slavery was more raw and realistic than some of the other lessons that I had been taught about race. This isn't to say that white supremacy hasn't changed the lesson at all over the years. I think that people are very touchy about teaching slavery, and they take it with a delicate approach because it's so emotional and taboo for people. It's just a sensitive topic. So people kind of dance around what they want to say about it. I think mistakes are made because teachers who are white have never had to experience oppression by race, so they can't really relate to the topic. So the history can be softened, and it doesn't seem as dark as it was. You don't hear as much about the horrible things that were happening to the slaves. They try to make it sound more cheerful. I was taught about the Underground Railroad and the Trade Triangle and things like that. But the details isn't what we were taught. We weren't taught about how when they were going from Africa to North America and from Europe, they were tied up together on these boats and they didn't have bathrooms. They were starved. They were just horrible living conditions for such a long boat trip to go between the continents. And then the Underground Railroad, all the horrible things when a slave would escape, and if they found them, they would beat them, they could rape them, they would murder them, just horrible things. And I think that a lot of curriculum covers that up and just leaves it just to the basics. It doesn't go into the details of how it was just really horrible. The Civil Rights Movement is another wonderful example of white supremacy. I think white people put rose-colored lenses over the horrible acts they've committed, and it really shows when lessons are taught in school because they're made to be so much less brutal and horrific than they were. Being taught about people like Ruby Bridges, Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, I heard about all the amazing things they did for the African American community, and I heard about civil rights marches and wanting African Americans to have equal rights. But what I never was taught about the violence, the murders, intense oppression, just the horrible acts that were being committed, and how terrifying it truly was for the African American community at this time. Textbooks and teachers, again, show to choose parts of history that they want to show. They do show that there was oppression, but they don't show the lengths that the Black and African American community had to go through. Is it intentionally added into our curriculum? I believe that most of the time it's not intentionally added. Not to say that it's never been intentionally added. There are some white supremacy groups and some people who do believe that white people are superior to other races. So I'm sure it's happened at some point, but I believe most of the time, from the teacher's perspective, I think that we look at the lessons that the curriculum we're given, and we look at the material that textbooks have, and we don't really think about what we're actually teaching. That sounds horrible, but we're not sitting there and saying, oh, we need to make sure, we need to fact check these textbooks, because we just assume the textbooks are right and they've already been fact checked. So I think it's kind of not necessarily negligence, but just teachers need to go through and fact check and make sure what they're doing, because it's not taking that step above to make sure they're teaching their students correct facts. I'm not sure who decided however many years ago to change history books in favor of white people. It's just horrible. I don't know why someone would do that. It's done so much harm over the years. It's going to take a lot of work to try to reverse what's been done. I don't know whether that was intentional or not, though, because it was so many years ago. I put a link here to a really good website about 3 things schools should teach Americans history about white supremacy. And if you get a chance to take a look at that, it's really informative and kind of touches on what I've been talking about. How to prevent white supremacy in curriculum. Teachers of any race need to be more observant to watch what they are teaching. This goes along with what I was saying a minute ago, that you need to go fact check your books, make sure what you're teaching is the facts and is what's going to be most useful for these kids to be able to make their own opinions in the future. Another way to prevent white supremacy in your curriculum is to teach our children the brutal, honest truth about everything that's happened in our history. So once you do those fact checks, make sure that you aren't going through and putting on those rose-colored white privilege lenses and saying, you know what, this is a horrible act committed by white people, but I'm going to teach my students about this anyway because it is someone's past and it is history, and we need to be able to learn from this and make our own opinions. Checking your own privilege is also a great way to prevent white supremacy as well. When you're going into the classroom, know that you have no experience with racial oppression if you're a white person, and just checking your privilege right at the door and saying, yes, I have privilege, I don't have any experience with this, and letting someone who has faced that come in and help you teach a lesson or help you understand or think about things that you normally wouldn't.